Imagine this. You're standing in the shadow of Palatine Hill in Rome, and something else, something more ominous. A scent that turns your stomach. But this isn't the solemn music of a state ritual. It's wild, urgent, and hypnotic. The rhythm claws at your thoughts, pulling you into something primal and strange. It's the year 2018 CE. The sun beats down on the ancient marble of the imperial palaces, making them glow white-hot under the Mediterranean sky. His face is bloodless, and his eyes scan the shadows in fear, watching, wary, as though even the walls might report him. But to whom? The emperor? It speaks in accented Latin giving commands, but the words vanish into the noise and revelry. Though ... is it really celebration you're hearing? The longer you listen, the more it sounds like something else. Something frantic, something deranged. But beneath all that beauty, something deeply unsettling is stirring. That's where the real story begins. The moment when the cracks in the empire split wide enough for something unimaginable to slip through. You catch it on the air, the heavy sweetness of exotic perfumes mingled with the metallic tang of spilled wine. His birth name wasn't the grand and Roman-sounding Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, though that was the name history would record. That name was a political invention, deliberately chosen to invoke the legacy of the Stoic philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius. From beyond the gilded doors of the emperor's residence, music drifts outward, flutes and drums. Unless you could convince the world, it meant everything. She wanted her son on the throne, and she was ready to rip the empire apart to make that happen. He tried to reduce the pay of the legions stationed in Syria. She seeded a rumor so brazen it could only have worked in an empire already teetering on the edge of belief and chaos. She claimed that her son young Varius was Caracalla's secret illegitimate child, born from an incestuous liaison with his beloved sister. The rumor was scandalous, blasphemous, and perhaps because of that, it gained traction. After all, in Roman politics, truth mattered far less than plausibility, and nothing conferred legitimacy like a bloodline. And Roman soldiers, while many things, were not known for their patience, especially when it came to their wages. The legionaries were restless. Their pay had been cut. Their loyalty to Macrinus hung by a thread. Her ambition burned hotter than any temple flame. She was the niece of Julia Domna, the powerful wife of Emperor Septimius Severus, and she had grown up in the shadow of imperial politics, surrounded by women who ruled from behind veils and curtains. The color of emperors, the color of divine right. The soldiers stared, and the drums of revolt began to beat. When Julia Domna died in 217 CE, shortly after her son, Emperor Caracalla, was assassinated, she left behind a network of Syrian noblewomen who had tasted real power and were not eager to give it up. The sun god Elagabal, symbolized by a sacred black stone, believed to have fallen from the sky, was the heart of religious life in Emesa. The temple itself dominated the city, its steps echoing with chants and rituals, its courtyards filled with the scent of burning incense and blood. The air was thick with the cries of temple priests and sacred sex workers, with sacrifice and ecstasy indistinguishable from one another. A slave bolts past you, clutching a golden chalice so tightly his knuckles have gone pale. This was the East, where the sacred and the profane bled into each other like dye into water. Here, gender, divinity, and identity were not fixed. They shifted, merged, and dissolved. In Rome, gods were worshipped with offerings and ceremony. In Emesa, they entered your body, spoke through your lips, and danced in your skin. To worship was to transform. Which one? The rightful ruler? Or the 14-year-old Syrian boy who somehow seized power and transformed the empire into a theater of chaos? And no one, not the Senate, not the guards, not even the gods themselves, seems to know how to stop what's coming. You flatten yourself against a column as a detachment of Praetorian guards strides by. Their bronze helmets catch the sun, but their expressions are dark, uncertain. One whispers something under his breath, something about sacrilege, about divine retribution. But he says it so quietly, you're not sure if you heard it at all. Leave a comment below. I'd love to know where you're listening from. It's incredible to think that together, across time zones and continents, we're rediscovering the forgotten past. Inside the palace, a voice cuts through the music. Young, confident, sharp. This is Rome at its most volatile. A moment when a teenager Elagabalus is seated on the throne of the Caesars. Before we explore these long-buried tales of ambition, ruin, and survival, consider subscribing and liking if you enjoy uncovering the darker corners of history. To understand how Rome came to be ruled by a boy king who remade the empire in ways no one dared imagine, we must rewind not to the founding of Rome, but to the unraveling of the Severan dynasty. The boy who would one day be known as Emperor Elagabalus was born around 2004 CE in the ancient Syrian city of Emmaus in modern-day Homs. His true name was Varius Avitus. Bassianus and he was the product of a powerful family of Syrian elites who understood a brutal truth about the Roman Empire. Blood meant nothing. Picture young Varius in those early years, growing up beneath the looming presence of the Temple of Elagabal. This wasn't Rome, with its clean marble lines and cults of discipline. Varius's mother, Julia Soaemias, was a woman of formidable will. But Julia Soaemias didn't want influence in the shadows. Her opportunity came when Macrinus, the man who had arranged Caracalla's assassination, made a fatal mistake. Julia struck swiftly. Now picture this, the spring of 2018 CE, in the dusty Syrian camp of Legio III Gallica. And then Julia Soaemias arrived. Her son, just 14, stood beside her draped in the rich purple of Roman imperial robes. His face was painted in the ornate style of the East kohl-lined eyes, lips tinged with color, skin smooth and perfumed. The boy moved with a grace that defied Roman ideas of masculinity fluid, poleness ethereal. She declared what she claimed was the truth. This was no ordinary child. This was the son of Caracalla, the rightful heir to the Roman throne cheated of his inheritance. But more than that, she said, he was the earthly incarnation of the Syrian sun god Elagabal, descended not only to rule, but to renew the empire in divine fire. His gestures held the attention of even the most battle-hardened veterans, drawing them in with a blend of fascination and discomfort. Before them stood Julia Soaemias, eyes blazing, voice steady. The soldiers looked again at the boy, not merely a painted youth in purple, but something other, something between man and woman, between mortal and God. And in their hearts, something stirred. Was it religious conviction? The kind that blooms under foreign stars, far from home and tethered to myth? Was it greed, hope for back pay, and a future on the victorious side of the Civil War? Or was it something stranger, some fever that sweeps through armies like wildfire when order collapses? It couldn't be bought. It couldn't be reasoned with. And it was spreading. Message after message echoed the same refrain. The boy isn't just claiming the throne. He is claiming the heavens. Whatever it was, they knelt. A priest emperor. A living son. They chant his name not like citizens hailing a new emperor, but like priests invoking a god. And the descriptions of the boy himself, they're so strange, so unreal, that Macrinus might have assumed his spies were embellishing or losing their minds. By adopting it, the boy wasn't just seizing imperial power, he was declaring himself divine. And sometimes, as something that seems to exist between the two, neither one nor the other, but something wholly new. He performs religious rites filled with dancing and singing, acts that conservative Romans would label obscene or sacrilegious. He speaks not only of marrying women, but also men and even gods, and abstract forces that had no names in Latin. His own soldiers start murmuring. Rumors circulate of the boy, who claims to be a living god, the reborn sun, the radiant embodiment of Elagabal. The emperor stands watching as his disciplined legion's men trained to obey without question begin to falter. One by one, then by dozens, they fall to their knees, not in defeat, but in worship. And Kerpel, hear the thunder of Syrian war drums, witness the fervor of believers lost in trance and devotion. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they switch sides. He flees in desperation, but there's nowhere left to run. Within days, he's captured, executed. His severed head is sent to the boy god as an offering. It is a surreal spectacle. Roman soldiers march in disciplined ranks side by side with Syrian temple priests. Imperial officials in crimson togas walk beside painted courtesans adorned in silks and perfumes. Sacred bulls are paraded beside gilded statues of the black meteorite of Elagabal. Incense rises in thick waves. Music follows them everywhere. Flutes, drums, voices singing in strange tongues. A symbol, proof that the old Rome is gone. And when battle comes, it's not a clash of steel, it's a mass conversion. And self-declared as Elagabalus, god of the sun, becomes the undisputed ruler of the Roman Empire. Across the dusty ground of the Syrian camp, a thunderous cry rose. Av Phaser! Hail Marcus Aurelius Antoninus! Hail Elagabalus! But even that name, Elagabalus, was not truly his. It was the name of the god he claimed to embody. Back in Antioch, when word of the uprising reached Emperor Macrinus, it must have struck like an earthquake. This wasn't a typical mutiny. Roman emperors had faced military revolts before those could often be quelled with gold, threats, or swift force. But this was different. This was a movement that blended religion and rebellion into a volatile new force. Imagine Macrinus pacing in his private quarters, unrolling dispatches from panicked generals and informants. His supporters aren't just soldiers, they're devotees, fanatics, worshippers, a painted godchild. Rome had seen madmen before. But this was something else entirely. They describe a 14-year-old who defies every Roman category. Some days he dresses as a man, other days as a woman. This isn't just rebellion. It's a revolution, a direct assault on the very foundations of Roman identity. Masculine virtue, rational rule, the lines that separate human from divine, citizen from subject, man from woman, law from madness. Macrinus sees the threat clearly. He gathers his legions and marches south, determined to crush the Syrian uprising before it spreads like wildfire. But as his forces approach the rebel encampment, something strange begins to happen. Macrinus's troops see the boy's army arrayed in gold. Imagine that moment. This wasn't just a coup. It was a spiritual upheaval. Macrinus, the emperor who schemed and murdered his way to power, now finds himself alone, abandoned by the very army he trusted to keep him on the throne. And so it is that Varius Avitus Bassianus, reborn through political illusion as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, but power is not the same as control. The journey from Syria to Rome takes months, and it is nothing like any imperial procession the empire has seen before. Picture the caravan winding its way across the eastern provinces, over land and sea, toward the heart of the empire. This isn't just a new emperor arriving in Rome. It's a new Rome arriving at the gates. Sacred prostitutes walk the same road as Praetorian guards, many of whom still don't understand what, exactly, they've sworn themselves to. At the center of it all rides Elagabalus Glorious, unsettling and divine, standing in a golden chariot pulled by white horses. Other days he wears flowing Syrian robes, his face adorned with cosmetics, jewelry gleaming at his throat, and wrists moving more like a sacred dancer than a ruler of legions. But it's not just his look that unsettles. It's his presence. His appearance changes daily, so much so that eyewitnesses are left speechless, unable to describe him without contradicting themselves. Some days he looks every inch the Roman emperor. Toga draped just so, posture dignified, a very image of Augustus reborn. Whispers in the Senate, rumors in the markets, dispatches to noble households carried by messengers too confused to explain what they've seen. Roman emperors were expected to be distant, mysterious, cold, divine through their inaccessibility. Elagabalus breaks all of that. He leaps into crowds. He touches soldiers. He weeps during ceremonies, sings in trance, dances in public, and speaks as if the gods are constantly whispering in his ear. To some, it's holy madness. To others, just madness. Crowds lining the streets, some cheering, many silent, most unsure whether to bow or run. The golden chariot rolls past, white horses glinting in the sun, but all eyes are on what rides beside the emperor. A massive black stone, the sacred meteorite of Elagabal, brought all the way from Syria to become the heart of a new spiritual order. As the procession nears Rome, stories begin to leak back to the capital. The boy emperor dances in public. A cosmic union. A political metaphor. A religious provocation. There is no precedent for such a ceremony. No script in Roman liturgy. No acceptance from the priesthood. The thump of hammers echoes across the city. Romans stare in disbelief as their skyline shifts beneath foreign gods. Old men wrapped in white debate not policy, but panic. He wants to remake it, to transform the capital of the empire into a mirror of his homeland's ecstatic devotion. Some urge resistance. Surely, the Praetorian Guard will not allow this Eastern sacrilege to defile Rome's sacred traditions. Others urge caution. The legions have already sworn loyalty. Opposition now means civil war. But beneath the arguments lies something deeper: fear. The common people, artisans, bakers, merchants, feel the ground shifting too. They don't understand the ceremonies. They don't understand their emperor. The statues in marble no longer match the boy on the throne. He wears women's clothing. The emperor has appointed Syrian priests to high office. He introduces ceremonies filled with drumming, dancing, ecstatic trance rituals unlike anything seen in the sober rites of Roman state religion. There are rumors acts so profane, so unspeakable, that they can only be described with silence and raised eyebrows. He performs rituals that ... Decent Romans refuse to describe aloud. Picture the scene in the Curia Julia, the ancient Senate house. Some say it is a challenge. Others, a declaration. Most simply do not know what to make of it, and that not knowing is more terrifying than any clear transgression. These are men who trace their lineage to the founding of the Republic, guardians of virtue, of tradition. They've survived assassinations, invasions, tyrants, and madmen. But this is different. For centuries, Rome had conquered the East, absorbed it, controlled it. Now, for the first time, the East is conquering Rome, not with swords, but with gods and symbols and ideas too foreign to be named. When Elagabalus enters Rome in the summer of 219 CE, the city holds its breath. Picture it. This is no mere coronation. This is a spiritual invasion. The boy emperor doesn't just want to rule Rome. Within days, the first sign appears. Elagabalus announces a marriage between the black stone of Elagabal and Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom and war. But that's just the beginning. Soon, workers begin construction on a massive new temple, not to Jupiter, not to Mars, but to Elagabal on the sacred Palatine Hill. Whispers become shouts. He begins to wear women's clothes in public, not as a disguise, not in mockery, but as something bold, strange, and unexplainable. The Roman aristocracy watches in horror. This is transformation, and it's happening too fast to stop. But it isn't just the elites who are shaken. Imagine a Roman shopkeeper standing beside his young son as the imperial parade passes. The boy asks, "Father, is that the emperor?" He doesn't know how to answer. Why does the emperor wear perfume and silk? Why are there drums and dancing in the temples? Why are the priests singing in a language no one understands? How do you respect an emperor when everything he does feels like a riddle with no answer? For many Romans, the truth is simple, if difficult to say. You don't. You adapt. You survive. You look for advantage in the shifting sands of power. In Rome, those with political instinct quickly learn the new game. Flatter the emperor's Syrian advisors, mimic Eastern fashion, and at least pretend to admire the strange new religious rites now spreading through the capital. Those who resist openly tend to vanish, not always permanently, but long enough to make an example. Yet beneath this surface obedience, discontent simmers. Tomorrow, he may proclaim himself the new incarnation of Venus. They are trained to obey orders, but what happens when those orders come from someone who seems alien to everything Roman honor and dignity stand for? How long can obedience survive humiliation? Next week, there are rumors he plans to build communal bathhouses where Roman modesty will be cast aside in favor of Syrian. Customs that most Romans view as deeply immoral. Rome has always clung fiercely to tradition, suspicious of change and proud of its customs. The emperor enters not in a toga, but in flowing robes embroidered with gold. These laws would append Roman marriage recognizing same-sex unions, legalizing practices long considered immoral, even blasphemous. When one elderly senator dares to protest, invoking tradition and law, the emperor does not respond with violence. Instead, the man is quietly reassigned to a distant post-exiled in all but name. His face is painted, his movements fluid, his presence mesmerizing. These are professional soldiers, sworn to serve the emperor, but the emperor they pledged to had certain expectations. Roman by birth, masculine in bearing, respectful of Roman virtue. It is the emperor's challenge to the very idea of Roman masculinity. But now they feel almost irrelevant, dissolving before their eyes. Elagabalus defies every one of those standards. To witnesses, it's unclear whether they're watching a wedding, a rite, or a challenge to the moral fabric of Rome. No, those customs are not just challenged. They are parodied by a teenage ruler claiming divine authority. And for many Romans, that is a line too far. Fathers, unsure how to explain to their sons why the emperor parades in silk gowns and pearl earrings. He speaks of acts that, in Roman culture, are not just taboo, they are unspeakable. Acts reserved for dark corners and brothels, never to be acknowledged in respectable society. Mothers, troubled by what example this sets for their daughters. What does it mean when the empire's most powerful man seems to disavow power itself? Now they bow to a figure who seems to glory in surrender, in softness, in roles traditionally seen as feminine and by Roman standards, weak. All they saw was their Emperor Rome's ultimate symbol of order rejecting the masculine ideal upon which the entire system rested. Senate meetings are interrupted by incense-filled rituals that the senators find sacrilegious and absurd. He is said to have married, not once, but many times, to women, to men, to foreign nobles, to his own priests, even to gods in elaborate ceremonies that mix Roman pomp with Eastern mystery. Ancient sources describe him not only wearing women's garments and cosmetics, but also seeking out physicians who might physically transform him into a woman. Decrees are issued that overturn centuries of Roman law through debate, but through divine revelation. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite imperial protectors, begin to show visible signs of unease. Now imagine the mood inside a Praetorian barracks. News has just arrived. The emperor intends to marry a male courtier. The soldiers whisper, uncomfortable. Their discipline is tested daily by new provocations. Things worsen when Elagabalus begins interfering directly with the machinery of Roman governance. He appoints Syrian favorites to high office, seemingly more for their beauty than their qualifications. Picture a Senate session 2 years into his reign. The chamber where Cicero once thundered and Augustus once redefined empire now echoes with foreign music and unfamiliar perfumes. He declares that the sun god has spoken to him, revealing new laws to be enforced immediately. The message is unmistakable: conform or disappear. But perhaps the greatest shock to Roman society is not political. It is personal. In a culture that values martial strength and stoic discipline, Elagabalus seems to delight in undermining every expectation. Modern scholars debate whether this was sincere identity expression or calculated provocation, but for his contemporaries, the question didn't matter. Now imagine conversations behind closed doors. Gender roles in Rome had already begun to fray under the pressures of empires spanning from Britain to Egypt. The emperor's personal life becomes a swirl of rumor and scandal. Each union is marked by festivals that blur the line between celebration and sacrament. And the shock does not end with the ceremonies. It is in how he speaks of them. Elagabalus openly expresses a desire to be submissive, to be treated as a woman in his relationships with men. Imagine the horror of the Roman elite men raised to believe that strength, dominance, and control are the marks of a ruler. It is not just an emperor they are witnessing. It is the collapse of an identity. What's happening in Rome isn't just politically dangerous. It's psychologically destabilizing. Elagabalus' rule challenges the fundamental ideas of power and gender that have shaped Roman identity for centuries. And as if the political and cultural upheaval weren't enough, the religious revolution he leads adds another disorienting layer. The old Roman system, based on solemn rituals and reciprocal obligations to the gods, is being replaced with something far more emotional, ecstatic, and unpredictable. His devotion to the Syrian sun god is not some private quirk. It's a deliberate attempt to transform Roman religion itself. Picture the emperor's new temple. Its centerpiece, a sacred black stone hauled across continents from Syria at tremendous cost. It rests in the heart of a sanctuary, draped in gold and silk, thick with the scent of incense and a rhythmic pulse of music drums, flutes, and strange stringed instruments never before heard in Roman worship. And there, leading the rites, is the emperor himself. He moves like a dancer, sings in foreign tongues, invokes deities alien to Roman ears. Perhaps Elagabalus is using his imperial power not just to rule, but to remake Rome itself. His garments blur every boundary between man and woman, ruler and priest, human and divine. All of them play their part in this surreal fusion of performance, prayer, and spectacle. From distant provinces, rumors of unrest and confusion echo back to the capital, as communities try to make sense of an empire that feels increasingly foreign. So do the unqualified appointees elevated to positions of authority. Governance falters. Rome's famed efficiency begins to crumble. Surrounding him are hand-picked followers. Some are Eastern nobles steeped in the mysteries of his faith. Others are Roman elites who've adapted to the new order, and many are once lowly slaves now elevated by beauty or devotion. To Rome's conservative observers, watching from the sidelines, it looks less like devotion than decadence. The old Roman base, the aristocrats, the generals, the priests feel abandoned. The boundaries between sacred and profane, public and private, seem to dissolve into something that glorifies not faith, but indulgence. But perhaps this isn't simply about spectacle or pleasure. Instead, she finds herself witnessing the unmaking of Rome's very essence. The boy who claimed to be the sun's avatar now risks blinding the world around him. If so, it is an audacious social experiment, an attempt to redefine the empire's values from the ground up: gender, sexuality, worship, authority, all tested on a scale no civilization has ever attempted. By the third year of his reign, the consequences begin to surface. But it has never faced an emperor like this one who seeks not to preserve the empire, but to reinvent it from its foundations. The Senate grows anxious, their patience fraying. The Praetorian Guard begins to grumble more openly. The imperial treasury is bleeding. Lavish ceremonies, endless festivals, ornate temples, they all come at a cost. The chance to imagine a Rome where old roles no longer apply, where power can look and sound and feel entirely different. And the emperor's religious vision, radical and deeply personal, alienates those it doesn't uplift. Imagine Julia Misa, the emperor's grandmother and political architect, watching all this unfold with growing dread. She had placed her hopes in him not for chaos, but for continuity cloaked in Eastern influence. A blend of innovation and tradition. The charisma that had helped Elagabalus rise, the charm, the boldness, the theatrical defiance, is proving to be his undoing. He burns too hot. He reshapes too fast. And like the sun, he may be too powerful, too strange, too destabilizing to be endured for long. Rome has endured civil wars, foreign invasions, economic collapse, even plague. Whether that reinvention is liberation or destruction depends on where you stand. To Rome's traditional elites, the senatorial class, the military, the religious conservatives, Elagabalus is a disaster, a living symbol of everything gone wrong, a threat to the very order that made Rome strong. But for others, women, freedmen, foreign-born citizens, sexual minorities, he offers something Rome has never promised before, the possibility of belonging. This clash of visions between tradition and reinvention will ultimately determine more than just Elagabalus' fate. It may decide the destiny of Rome itself. The boy emperor who promised transformation has delivered far beyond anyone's wildest imaginings. The only question now is whether Rome can survive the transformation he's unleashed. That answer will come sooner than anyone expects, and in ways no one can yet imagine. Because the reign of Elagabalus is approaching its climax, and the very forces that once lifted him to divine heights are about to turn against him with a ferocity that will stun even those accustomed to his radical rule. But that is a story for what comes next, for when the sun god's living representative on earth learns that even divine authority has its limits. Shadowy figures moving in the corners of his bedchamber. Voices speaking his name in languages he doesn't understand. Footsteps that stop the moment he turns around. Cold air with no breeze. The feeling of being watched. And that some transformations demand a price no one is prepared to pay. He glances over his shoulder more often, and he looks ahead. The palace servants whisper that the emperor has been dreaming again. He burns incense by the cartload, recites invocations until his voice breaks, weeps before the meteorite he once called the face of God. They know the difference between divine inspiration and spiritual collapse, and what they now see is not a prophet. It's a boy unraveling beneath the weight of his own mythology. But these are not the radiant visions he once described. Golden light, heavenly voices, divine instruction. These dreams are darker. Or perhaps, after years of claiming to be a living God, he is beginning to realize that gods aren't the only forces that walk unseen through the corridors of power. They may now be returning, not as allies, but as rivals. This is not the vibrant young man who once mesmerized legions and outmaneuvered senators. This is something broken, something unraveling. And now she watches, powerless, as he turns that throne into a pulpit for madness. He no longer hears voices except those in his own mind, voices that whisper betrayal, judgment, doom. Perhaps it's guilt. Perhaps it's fear. The Roman gods he displaced. The ancestral spirits whose rites he desecrated. The foreign deities he summoned without understanding. The emperor stands before his sacred meteorite, arms outstretched, crying out to his god to appear physically, visibly, undeniably. Some fall to their knees, praying. Others flee. He executes servants for imagined betrayals, then weeps, and pardons them, and changes his mind again. Picture him during those haunted nights, pacing across the polished marble of his private chambers, while his latest consort, the charioteer Heracles, chosen for his beauty and silent strength, sleeps, undisturbed nearby. The rumors spread like blood in water, The emperor is mad. The emperor is cursed. The emperor has been abandoned by his god. The spark, the fire, the confidence that once held the court in his grip. She has waited patiently for this moment, cultivating ties with the traditional Roman elite. At 13, he is everything the empire now craves after 4 years of chaos. Where Julia Soaemias bet on divinity, Julia Misa has placed her hopes in discipline, moderation, and tradition. Perhaps it's exhaustion 4 years of ruling by spectacle, of holding together an empire with fire and ritual. 4 years of watching their emperor turn sacred rituals into burlesque theater. Or perhaps it's just what happens when a teenager is given the powers of a god and none of the limits of a man. The boy who once ruled with theatrical poise and celestial confidence now flinches at every sound of duty, of restoring Rome. His daytime behavior becomes increasingly unstable. Where once he dazzled the court with rituals and charisma, now he dissolves into rambling tirades about invisible enemies and divine conspiracies. His ceremonies grow ever more elaborate, more desperate, less worship than performance, less performance than plea. Even the Syrian priestsmen, steeped in ecstatic rites and ancient mysteries, begin to step back. When your god-emperor starts claiming that rival deities are hunting him through the palace halls, it's time to consider alternative employment. Elagabalus declares his intent to remove all images of traditional Roman gods from their temples, to replace Jupiter, Mars, and Venus with Elagabal alone. Julia Soaemias, his mother, watches her son descend into something she can no longer manage or predict. She had sacrificed everything to place him on the throne: her reputation, her security, the foundations of Roman tradition. She tries to intervene, to surround him with wiser counsel, to temper the wildest instincts of his court, but it is too late. Elagabalus no longer listens to advice. The breaking point comes in the winter of 221 CE, during one of his most elaborate religious festivals. Picture the Temple of Elagabal. Hundreds of courtiers packed into the incense-choked space, sweat slicking their robes, hysteria lurking just beneath the surface. And then, something goes wrong. Perhaps it's the pressure of invoking miracles. Whatever the cause, the emperor collapses. Not a graceful swoon, not a staged ecstasy. A full violent seizure. He hits the temple floor writhing. His courtiers scream. Is it divine possession? Is it madness? Is it a sign? Hours later, he wakes, but something fundamental is gone. Now he speaks only in whispers of betrayal, of unseen enemies, of gods turning their backs. And with those rumors, power begins to shift. Julia Misa, his aunt, and the mother of his cousin Severus Alexander, steps forward. Her son Alexander is the perfect foil. Modest, masculine, respectful of Roman institutions. Picture the quiet meetings in Julia Misa's quarters. The Praetorian commanders arrive one by one. They do not speak of rebellion. They speak of stability. The Praetorian Guard has served Elagabalus for 4 long years. 4 years of parading in women's silk. 4 years of enforcing decrees that mock Roman values. Their loyalty is not limitless. The final breach comes in March of 222 CE. That, at last, is too much. Not just eccentricity. Not just excess, but open war against the Roman soul. And the Guard, at last, chooses Rome over the sun god's fading light. It's no longer about religious innovation. It's destruction now. Active destruction of everything Rome holds sacred. The emperor who once claimed to bring divine enlightenment now threatens to erase the very spiritual architecture of Roman identity. Even his staunchest allies begin to falter. The Syrian courtiers, once smug in their proximity to power, begin asking discreet questions about safe passage home. Roman elites who once bent with the winds of his regime begin quietly preparing for what comes next. And the palace servants, those silent, watchful hands on whom all emperors depend, start shifting their loyalties. They've seen enough to know when the end is near. And Julia Misa sees her moment. On the morning of March 11th, 222 CE, Elagabalus and his mother Julia Soamias walk into what they believe is a routine meeting with commanders of the Praetorian Guard, meant to finalize security plans for yet another religious procession. But what they find in that chamber is not loyalty. It is judgment. The room is full, but silent. The guards carry weapons, yes, but not in honor. Their faces are set, cold, final. This is not an ambush. It's a verdict. Imagine the moment the boy emperor realizes the sun has set on his ring, that the divine aura he believed would protect him forever has flickered out, that the gods, his gods, Rome's gods, all gods are silent now. There is no last miracle, no speech, no plea, only the swift, brutal efficiency of soldiers who've decided that the only way to save the empire is to destroy its ruler. Her ambition, once the most powerful force in the empire, meets its end in that silent room, collapsing into the marble floor in a pool of her own making. Julia Soamias dies first, trying to shield her son. Some cheer, shouting curses at a reign they deemed blasphemous. Others are silent. A few weep perhaps not for the emperor himself, but for something lost with him, a possibility, a rupture in the fabric of order that, for a moment, showed the empire a different shape. Elagabalus follows moments later. The boy who claimed immortality learns that mortality is the one Roman tradition that does not yield to innovation. At 13, he is even younger than Elagabalus was when he took power. But in every other respect, he is the opposite. Where one blurred gender and ritual, the other embodies conventional Roman virtue. But death is not the end. The challenge to Roman masculinity, the merging of East and West, the dream of a world remade. His body, once robed in imperial purple, once bowed to by senators and priests, is stripped, mutilated, desecrated in ways designed to strip away not just the man, but the myth. Picture the streets of Rome. The bodies of Elagabalus and his mother dragged through the gutters, crowds lining the roads. Their corpses are thrown into the Tiber, not buried, not burned, not mourned, discarded. It is a rejection not just of a ruler, but of everything he represented. The transformation of the sacred. For them, the restoration is a return to order, to structure, to sanity. The empire, they say, has awoken from a fever dream. The sacred meteorite, the black stone that stood at the center of Elagabalus's divine mission, is quietly packed, sealed, and returned to Syria. Gone, too, are the lovers promoted for beauty rather than skill, the edicts that distorted Roman law, the symbols of a foreign faith forced upon an ancient city. A memory that for 4 years, however chaotic, however extreme, the rules had shifted. All of it swept away. Where the empire itself ancient, unyielding Rome could be bent, if only briefly, into new shapes. Within hours, Alexander Severus, Julia Mesa's grandson, is declared emperor. Couples recall those strange years when power wore unfamiliar shapes. Philosophers and priests argue over what it meant, what it still means that, for a time, Rome was ruled by someone who defied every expectation of emperor, gender, and God. Where Elagabalus experimented, Alexander restores. Where his cousin bent tradition, Alexander honors it. His early acts speak not of vision, but of restoration. The temple of Elagabal is repurposed. Its priests, once exalted, are dismissed or executed. The empire breathes again, but not freely, not entirely. Because erasing a person from power is easier than erasing the imprint they leave behind. In homes across Rome, whispered conversations bloom. Parents struggle to explain to their children why the man they bowed to as a god is now floating in the Tiber. Some Romans feel relief. Shopkeepers, senators, soldiers, but others feel something else. Among the enslaved and the freed, among women, among those who lived on the fringes of Roman respectability, something lingers. And in that shifting, they saw a different world flicker into view. A world where power could look like something unfamiliar, where gods could wear new faces. Elagabalus is gone, but what he showed cannot be unseen. The followers of foreign religions, those who experienced a brief moment when spiritual diversity was celebrated, not just tolerated, now find themselves returned to silence. For them, the new emperor's traditionalism may feel less like restoration and more like repression. The historical record, authored mostly by Roman aristocrats who benefited from Elagabalus' fall, presents his reign as an aberration, a warning, a grotesque mistake. They called him mad, depraved. They needed to believe they had saved Rome, a monster whose very existence was an insult to nature and to the gods. But history is written by the survivors. And in this case, the survivors had every reason to justify their actions. His death was not just necessary, it was cleansing. The senators who sanctioned his murder, the guards who carried it out, the aristocrats who reclaimed power, they all needed to believe what they had done wasn't just politically wise, but morally righteous. But as always, the truth is more complicated. Elagabalus was no saint. His reign was chaotic, unstable, often deeply offensive to Roman sensibilities, nearly consuming the empire in the heat of his vision. But he was also something the empire had never seen before, a ruler who used imperial power not to enforce tradition, but to question it, who turned the emperor's palace into a theater of possibility, where identity, gender, and divinity were not fixed, but fluid. Whether you see his reign as a liberation or a catastrophe depends on where you stood. If you believed that traditional Roman values, masculine virtue, religious orthodoxy, rigid social hierarchies were essential to Rome's survival, then Elagabalus represented everything dangerous about a cosmopolitan, multicultural world. The fault lines he revealed between old power and new identity, between sacred ritual and personal transformation, between the world that was and the world that could have been. But if you believe those same values were outdated, oppressive, ill-fitted for an empire that spanned from Britain to Mesopotamia, that included dozens of cultures, languages, and religions, then Elagabalus was something else entirely. A missed opportunity, a glimpse of what Rome might have become if it had embraced transformation instead of fearing it. The boy who called himself the sun god's chosen, who blurred the lines between emperor and priest, male and female, east and west, burned brightly, briefly, consuming himself. His reign lasted just 4 years. You hear the hymns of old gods returning. You see the imperial chariot replaced by something plain, respectable, Ramon. But those 4 years forced Rome to confront questions it would spend the next 3 centuries trying to resolve. And perhaps that is his true legacy. Not the temples he built or the decrees he issued, but the discomfort he sowed, the conversations he started. Rome survived Elagabalus, just as it would survive barbarian invasions, civil wars, economic collapse, and its own eventual disintegration. But it never forgot the lesson of those strange, impossible years, that the boundary between order and chaos, between sanctity and blasphemy, between emperor and outcast, is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Who imagined a future unshackled from tradition and paid for it with his life. And now, standing once more in that Roman street where we began, you watch as the palace servants rush past, heads down, voices low. The exotic music is stopped. The painted courtiers are gone. The marble halls have grown quiet. But if you listen carefully, in the hush of corridors, in the restless dreams of those who lived through it, you can still hear the echoes. The laughter of a boy who dared to remake the world in his image. Elagabalus is gone. But the questions he raised about power, identity, and the courage to imagine something different, those questions remain. And maybe that is the most fitting epitaph for the transgender, boy who turned Rome into an orgy. He dared to believe the world could be otherwise, and was destroyed for the audacity of his imagination.